We have with us some special guests. This webinar is brought to you to bring attention to what is happening here in Canada. Canada is celebrating 150 years of colonization and occupation this year as they celebrate their 150th birthday on Native territory. My father, Arthur Manuel, recently passed away this year, and he worked closely with Russ Daibo, who they plot and plan, how are we going to fight back as Indigenous people? And he really wanted to make July 1st a time to not forget about what Canada has done to us. So we have some very important guests and very educated to bring you the real live issues of what's happening in Indian country across Canada. We have with us Eric Violet Lee. She's Cree, now a student at the University of Saskatchewan, an Indigenous community organizer from inner city Saskatoon. She writes on her blog, Moontime Warrior. Everybody check that out. And we also have with us Dr. Pam Palmater. She's a Mi'kmaq lawyer, author, social justice activist, and chair in Indigenous governance at Ryerson University from Eel River Bar First Nations in New Brunswick. She has 4 university degrees, includes a BA from St. Thompson in Native Studies, an LLB from UNB, and her master's and doctorate in law from Dalhousie University, specializing in Indigenous law. Pam has been volunteering and working in First Nation issues for over 25 years on a wide range of issues like poverty, housing, education, Aboriginal and treaty rights, and legislation impacting First Nation. She came in second in the Assembly of First Nations election for a national chair in 2012 and was one of the spokespeople and public educators for I Don't Know More movement. She has been recognized for many awards for her social justice advocacy on behalf of First Nations generally, and Indigenous women and children specifically. Her books, Indigenous Nationhood, Empowering Grassroots Citizens, and Beyond Blood, Rethinking Indigenous Identity, and legal articles, academic journals, magazine articles, and invited news editorials focuses on Indigenous law, politics, and governance. Her most recent work focuses on police racism and sexualized violence against Indigenous women and girls. This is a webinar. We're here to, bring voices from the front lines to the rest of you that are interested in learning about what does Indigenous solidarity mean, what does our Indigenous rights mean here in 2017. So we say we're not celebrating Canada 150, and we're here to tell you why and have this space for these women and these organizers to let the world really know what Canada 150 really means and why we're saying unsettle Canada instead. I'd like to hear from Pam. She's been a voice and a face for I Don't Know More, for bringing the word out about what is really happening. We saw yesterday that there was young people that were arrested in Ottawa on Parliament Hill. We see today Native people blockading the Trans-Canada Highway in Winnipeg. These are some very big actions that have really sparked attention across Canada. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts about those current actions that happen?
Thanks, Kanahus. Pam Palmater. I'm from the sovereign Mi'kmaq Nation in unceded Mi'kmaqi territory, and it's really awesome to be with all of you today because you all represent the resistance and decolonization, and I think it's very timely that we're talking about Canada 150 because for I'm sure most of us on here, it's more like genocide 150 or racism 150 or colonialism 150. And that's the message that gets lost in all of the celebration, in the $500 million propaganda game, which is, let's present Canada as social justice, human rights, multiculturalism, and symbolically, let's include a little bit of native arts and crafts and a few dancers and make it look like all is well and good here in our territories. And of course it's not. I mean, the name itself is offensive. Canada 150, oh my goodness, we have some elders that are almost that age, and our nations have been here since time immemorial. And so it really could be called Turtle Island time immemorial. And I think that's that all of these protests and rallies and marches and blockades, teach-ins and peaceful ceremonies like the TP ceremony is really to draw attention to all of that, that it is not the big party place, that it is not the Mecca that the international community seems to think it is, that our lands are still occupied. And although our latest prime minister is really, really good at flowery words and photo ops and including all of the superficial things like land acknowledgements, what we're talking about is far more substantive. So I would much rather have a prime minister who never gave a land acknowledgement, but actually transferred the land back, so that he's not constantly rubbing it in our faces like, I acknowledge the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq, but he needs to go on and say that we're still occupying and that we're not giving back. And so that all of these, actions talk about that. And I think there is something worth celebrating, not under the banner of Canada 150, but the fact that we're still here and we're still celebrating our own cultures and identity, not as the Canadian government would like us to, in terms of being an assimilated Canadian, an integrated Canadian, but as Mi'kmaq or Cree or Haudenosaunee. I think that part is really important for us because it's a two-part conversation. One is holding the colonizers to account and making sure that Canadians know the brutal truth. But the other side of the conversation is really for our own people, and especially our little people and our youth, that we should be really proud of ourselves, that despite everything that Canada has done, think of scalping bounties and smallpox blankets and forced sterilizations, murders, rapes, and tortures in residential schools, everything that they've done to try to wipe us off the face of this territory. We have resisted and survived and are still proud of who we are. And I think that's what's going to take our little people into the future, that we need to have that pride in our resilience in order to go forward. And I know some people want to participate in the Canada Day celebrations, and I have respect for how everybody wants to participate in this. Some want to do it as a sign, protest as resistance, and some want to do it as a celebration of survival. And other people who aren't politically engaged or who aren't having these conversations, for example, may want to celebrate Canada and the fact that they have good relations with their treaty partners or the settler population. And I think there's space for all of those things. But I think what our people have done leading up to Canada Day and resisting is exceptionally powerful, because we have captured the voice. It was going to be a $500 million party, and us, with no money, we have managed to turn that conversation around. And where is all the media today? It's at the teepee. It's not on the Prime Minister. It's not on the ministers. It's not on Canada Day flags. It's all on the teepee. And I think that shows how powerful we are. Imagine if all of us were doing this at the same time in all of the diverse ways that we could. Imagine what we could force on the agenda. And so for me, this whole Canada Day fiasco has goodness and lessons in it. That we have a small number of people, no money, no political group, no elected leadership, just like Idle No More. But we can organically as Indigenous nations come together and force to happen what we want and need to happen and what is right. And I think that's the most important thing for me that I'm getting out of all of this.
Thank you. That's really powerful when we start talking about Indigenous people across the country. Turtle Island, when we come together like this, it's powerful. And I do believe in direct action, and it's going to take direct action on the ground from the people most impacted, where we're really going to see change and really able to expose these real issues. I wanted to bring the conversation to Erica. I know I've been following you on Facebook, and now I know that you have this blog. I want to like hear from you as a young woman, the issues that you're facing, just living in the confines of Canada, in this country of Canada. And like we heard Turtle Island and Memorial, that's really powerful. Like we've been here for forever, and as young people making up the majority of the Indigenous population, where we're feeling the impacts of everything. We're having the fentanyl crisis, we're having Native youth freezing and dying on the streets. There's a lot of issues that we are facing, and bringing your voice out there to the world, and giving other young people inspirational ways to be, so we could all stand up and fight back. I hear your words.
Hi, Tanse, everybody. Erica Vali Nitsika-san, Misaskatomanik Nidotsen. I'm calling in from Saskatoon, inner city Saskatoon. And yeah, Canada 150, people keep asking me what it means to me as a young Cree woman. And growing up, I don't remember much about Canada except that we were forced to sing the national anthem in school, at a school where it was predominantly Indigenous kids, right? I grew up with lots of Cree kids and Métis kids, particularly at Pleasant Hill School. And I was lucky because we got to learn our language, we got to be surrounded by Native kids and Native teachers, and I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that we managed to keep a little bit of our culture and our people safe in an inner city, which is not a place where we're supposed to be safe. I was having a really good conversation with a brilliant Anishinaabe academic, Vanessa Watts, who mentioned to me the ways that urban Indigenous people are erased. And as Indigenous people, how we're forced off of reserves. We're told that these communities are doomed. We're told that these reserve communities are places of death. They're places of tragedy. And so forced into urban spaces, that's basically an excuse for the federal government to not give us any kind of funding. So once they've destroyed the reserves and made them uninhabitable by force, they drive us into inner city and urban communities, which is where I live and where I have always lived. And then they continue to deprive us of what we deserve as human beings, but as Indigenous people of this land in inner city and urban communities. So that's how I grew up. I grew up being urban and having my indigeneity questioned because of that, but also knowing that this is a legacy of the Canadian government, finding all the ways it can to dispossess us from our lands and from our indigeneity. As your father spoke about, as Russ Diabo and all of these amazing Indigenous activists before me have talked about, the main purpose of the federal government, to keep itself legitimate, it needs to destroy Indigenous people. And that's what Canada 150 is about. It's about our destruction. It's about celebrating 150 years of occupation. And so people keep asking me, are you sad? Are you sad and are you mourning? Like you're not celebrating, right? Because Indigenous people don't have anything to celebrate. And I think, well, actually, I do have a lot to celebrate because we're here despite all of these attempts to destroy us, despite all of the shit that we face. we're still here, and I see more and more Indigenous young people standing up. It's primarily Indigenous youth, I think, students, university students, and others who started and organized that action on Parliament Hill right now. So I've never been so proud and so excited to be an Indigenous young person growing up and getting to see other young people stepping up and being so aware of the way that Canada is not ours, but the way that this land is ours and the way we can take it back. So that's what reoccupation is to me. And I think it's such a beautiful, so it's a celebration for me, but not what Canadians are celebrating.
Thank you. It's so beautiful how resistance is. It's so heartfelt, and that's why we do the things that we do, is because we love our land and we love our people and we love our young people and all those ones with the warrior spirit to go out and confront the system, because that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage, especially those young people when they're getting ready for all of this. And Canada hype, Canada 150 hype. But then it always brings us back to the thought of criminalization, and that as Indigenous people, we're forced to this extreme where we have to take direct action, and then we're criminalized and we're like handcuffed, shackled, and brought to their prisons. And we know that the Trudeau government and the Canadian government has a justice minister that they appointed, and she's Native. And it's really confusing, I feel, for Native people and Native youth to say, oh, that's good that one of our people are up there in that position. But she's still on the agenda and the mandate of the Canadian federal government, and people can't be tricked by Jody Wilson-Raybould. People need to know like what she stands for and what she represents, and some of the threats that she's making right now. And I wanted to ask Pam your thoughts on all of that.
Well, I'm actually glad you raised it, because the whole decolonization process, as I was saying, involves two conversations, really holding the colonizers accountable. But part of holding the colonizers accountable are holding some of our own people who are in positions of leadership that are enabling or facilitating the colonizers to continue with their colonization project. And unfortunately, Jody Wilson-Raybould, as the Minister of Justice, has done a complete 180 in terms of what she used to do when she was the regional chief of the BC AFN, for example. So, for example, when she was the regional chief of BC AFN, she wrote a letter to Indian Affairs condemning gender discrimination in the Indian Act and saying that cutoff dates and male-female inequality had to be addressed, that there was no dealing around it, there was no negotiating, that had to be out of the Indian Act. And then all of a sudden, when she's the Minister of Justice, who's the one actually fighting all of these Indigenous women and children in court? It's Jody Wilson-Raybould. And here's the thing that we don't understand. The Deschanel case just came out, said you've got to stop Canada. You've got to stop gender discrimination in the Indian Act. No one likes the Indian Act, but you simply can't keep discriminating against Indigenous women and children. Fix it all. Don't just fix the Deschanel scenario, fix it all. And they said never, never, never were they going to do that. This is the testimony from Minister Bennett and Justice Canada, that they were never going to go back and make sure that men and women were equal. So because they put the Senate in such a horrible position, the entire unanimous Senate, now think about what that means. That's independents, conservatives, and liberals, said, we shouldn't even be having this conversation about whether or not to have equality for Native women. Like, how can that even be a question? Even under Canada's own laws, the Charter and the Constitution, it's mandatory. Under Indigenous laws, of course, it's mandatory. So if you put those two things together, what's to actually fight about? And so the Senate made changes to the legislation to guarantee equality for all Indigenous women and children. And when it got to the House, the Justice Minister, the Minister of Indian Affairs, and all of those members said, no, we're taking that out. So basically said, we're not supporting gender equality. And interestingly enough, they made that vote on National Aboriginal Day. So on the one hand, you have Jody Wilson and the Prime Minister saying there's no relationship more important to us than that with Indigenous peoples. What they should have said is, oh, just the men, in fact, not Indigenous women and children, the strength of our nations. And so you could take that example and apply it across the board. Look at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decision with Dr. Cindy Blackstock. She won. She proved that Canada discriminates in its funding formulas for Indigenous kids in care, foster care, as compared to Canadians in foster care. The court ordered them to remedy that, to have at least equal funding. They have been ordered 3 additional times now, and they're in non-compliance. And what is Jody Wilson's response? Well, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal can't force us to do anything. How can this come from an Indigenous person? So in this scenario, resistance and decolonization, unfortunately, requires us to call out these people who are acting counter to their own people's interests. And that's the difficult part of decolonization and resistance. It means that we can't always go along and get along. That when there are threats to our people, we have to call them out. And we would have done that in the old days too. We've just been taught and programmed that we always have to be nice and polite and not disagree. But in fact, that's not the case. And I think that she's one of the people that needs to be called out.
Thank you. I believe in calling everybody out that's really going against the best things for our future, for our children and for our youth. Do we have our guest, another guest that has come? I see here we have someone else that has joined the call. Fatin Chowdhury is a photographer and writer based in Toronto. He is an organizer for affordable housing, climate, and racial justice. So he's currently in Ottawa, and he is there to assist and document the reoccupation. And you heard us talking about it earlier, about the teepee that was set up there in Ottawa. It has gotten a lot of attention. It's going viral. Do we have Fatin? Can you hear us? You're gonna have to, yeah, you're gonna have to put the mute. So for those that are joining us right now, this is a live webinar, Unsettling Canada. It's our second part of the series, and we're bringing to you Frontline voices. And
hey, hi, can you hear us?
Yes, here he is. Can you give us an update from there on the ground? What happened just recently? You were there the other day. Okay, I'm not sure. He's disconnected somehow. We're gonna try to get him back here. But this was this starting to get like into a very real conversation when we're talking about how the Canadian government will position itself and how they'll put those red, brown faces in those leadership positions. And we see that all around. We see that in our community as well. We're seeing certain things where the Indian Affairs Chief and Council systems, they're signing with the pipelines, they're signing with mining, opposing the people and the wishes that they want in protecting water. We say, you know, Resistance 150 is a celebration. Okay, here we have, he's joined the video again. If you could put your mute on and give us an update, please. I'm aware that you were there when the teepee was being erected, or possibly when the arrest happened, or if you could give us an update on what happened there in Ottawa. You're, you're, you're mute. Fatin, do you want
Okay,
to go ahead?
so hey, okay, we're talking now. Okay, so I'm here with Hamda, who has been here from the reoccupation since the beginning. So I just got in earlier through security. There was a lot of like security checks where they kind of asked everyone to make sure like what their belongings were, and that process was kind of lengthy. And right now they're doing sound checks in the back on the side. So you can hear a lot of audio, and behind us is where the tent is. And some of the Indigenous folks who have been speaking, it's been hard to hear them as well because of the audio from like the sound checks that they're doing. So I think like there's like various indirect ways that they're trying to, I think, like stifle voices and like leadership as well. And we're also currently standing on this like these tarps that if we were not standing on them, the RCMP would like take them away. And Hamda, I'm gonna let you speak a bit more about that and also what your experience has been since the reoccupation.
So, hello, my name is Hamda Diria. I've been living here in Ottawa my whole life. I identify as a Black Somali Muslim settler here in Canada. Sorry for all the noise around us. There's a giant stage over there, and they're being quite obnoxious and rude while they hear us performing ceremony here and trying to push forth a cause. So I've been here with the Ottawa organizing, or grassroots organizing initiative here with so myself, Frederick Stoney Point, Trisha Bezinet, Summer Harmony Tweenish, and Ashley Corshane. We're all Carleton University students, and we just had an idea. We saw the hype around Canada 150, and all of us as racialized individuals or white settler allies, we saw the rhetoric and the propaganda and the nearly $500 million that was being put into this initiative that essentially celebrates 150 plus years of genocide and expropriation and violence upon Indigenous bodies, and the industrialization of Indigenous lands as well for profit and for the nation building systems that are enacted here in the sovereignty. So we began this initiative and we were met with a lot of backlash, not only by the state, so state actors like the RCMP, the OPP, and their liaison for both sides, but we also felt a lot of backlash from our own colleagues, our own teachers and professors who teach us all these theories and hide behind their books and hide behind all these big words but don't want to actually enact it into change and anything that's an active mobilization of resistance and resilience and strength and trying to create a dialogue. So we plan to start this as a 4-day ceremony, and we put a call out for any communities, grassroots communities, Indigenous grassroots communities who want to be in alignment with us. And luckily we have the wonderful Serpent River First Nations, Bawating water protectors and land protectors who traveled all the way from Sault Ste. Marie with $137 in their pocket and the money that we fundraised to essentially get them a van that ran on vegetable oil to travel all the way here. And on June 28th, as we carried the teepee poles and the parchments and all the stuff to essentially establish the ceremony, we were all met with incredible police violence. One of our protectors, Jonathan, was met with extreme police violence. He was choked by one of the parliamentary security guards, parliamentary police. I was threatened to be arrested. I was tugged and pulled and pushed, and all the allies and the Indigenous protectors who were here, we stood our ground for 5 hours at the entrance of Parliament Hill, holding onto those poles for 5 hours. The police were pushing back at us at the front. They almost broke some of the poles, and we were resilient and strong, and we had this collective strength and this opposition against such violence that's being imposed historically and presently. But even as we saw those mechanisms existing today and mechanisms transmitting currently in this occupation, and the tensions that were facilitated between ourselves and the police state. The first day was incredibly gruesome. The second day, I worked for 5 hours negotiating with the RCMP communications and conflict resolution team to get us to move the teepee that we erected right at the front gates after the 5-hour standoff, right next to the hill, right on the hill, sorry, right next to the stage. And we did it. We accomplished in that manner. And the unfortunate backlash is they refuse to give us security. They refuse to give us the barricades that we asked to protect us from settlers and those who are celebrating Canada 150 to essentially tokenize and mess with the ceremony in the teepee that is here standing right behind me right now. They refuse to give us shelter. They said erect a teepee or nothing. So it's been raining for the past 3 days, and we have gotten no shelter. A lot of us here have chronic illnesses, and we're not being. The police claim that they protect us and that they have our best interests at heart, but all we have been met with aggression. They refuse to give us a tent because they claim there's a national terrorist security, like a terrorist issue. We don't have weapons. We don't have anything to impose violence upon them. We're not chasing after people on the parliament grounds. We're here to educate, and we're here to create a dialogue. So right now, as maybe some of you heard, it's the third day, and we are currently under siege for the past 2.5 hours. We stood our ground, and we refused the negotiation process and the neglect to give us a tent. So we, as you can probably see, well, I'm standing on it now. We have the tarp for the tent that we wanted to erect, and parliamentary police, OPP, we have CISA surrounding us with machine guns. We have people standing up on the rooftops of buildings around us with snipers pointing directly at us. So just that small descriptor right there, we could see this as a war zone, essentially. We came here with love and peace in our hearts. We came here to spread a message, but now we're technically in war. We're here asserting sovereignty and asserting the right for Indigenous people to claim their identity and to claim their ceremony on these lands, because all lands is ceremony, and that has to be reconciled and recognized. Unfortunately, we had an unpleasant visit by Trudeau and his wife. They uninvitedly walked into the teepee. They poked their heads in and said, "Hey, can we come in?" Including 3 other MPs. They gave us no warning. Some of the protectors were sleeping. They had an exhausting night. They were up since 5 in the morning, and they just wanted a bit of semblance of peace before starting the day. And they're fasting as well. So the arrogance and the ignorance to claim that they can come in here and just spread some type of BS agenda that they're here for reconciliation, they're here to support this Indigenous collective here, is we caught wind of that fairly quickly, and we have it in full recording. So the rest of the organization team is gonna watch it, and if we choose to publicize it, which I think we will, you'll be seeing that shortly, I hope. And you can see the rhetoric that Trudeau was essentially performing up here. I know I was speaking a lot. There's a lot that happened these past 3 days, but just please show your support and just spread the message here that we are showcasing on social media. And I really appreciate you guys giving me some time to talk on this webinar. I appreciate it.
Thank you for bringing the voice and that fire from the front lines. We know that what you did there and what you're a part of, and just in alone the Indigenous solidarity that is given from people who recognize they're in and occupying and settling on Indigenous territory. So this webinar is actually called Unsettling Canada, and this is what it's all about, is reclaiming back our space and our lands and territory. So Fatin, is there anything else that you want to share with people before we let you go?
Scott.
Is he offline again? Well, now since you're there, Erica, live, can you tell us your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think that what they're doing over in Ottawa is such an unceded Algonquin territory is such an amazing, beautiful action. And for me, it's so symbolic too, not just symbolic, but also very practical. The fact that it's a teepee, right? And a teepee is a symbol of home. For Cree, it's like a symbol of our homes and of mobility and the right to move freely on our lands without facing violence. A right that we've had for centuries before Canada was here, before 150. So the fact that people are facing so much violence, police violence, state violence, and also just the intrusion of Trudeau, right? Believing that he can just walk into this space without asking permission is sort of a microcosm of the history of Canada, walking into our teepee uninvited, wanting to talk about reconciliation or something, and basically just invading, continuing the process of invasion that continues. So I think we have Fatin back. So I'll just transition over to him.
And also like very thankful to like other grassroots organizing that's been happening to like continue to build community and also resistance between Indigenous and migrant communities. And thank you again for like letting us join. And I'll follow along. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Chow. So there we can see the teepee that's been put up. And it's the power of home. This is our land. Our land is our home. Well, thank you, Fatin and sister, for bringing that voice and letting us see what's actually happening there on the front lines, there in Ottawa, Algonquin territory. Did you want to continue on, Erica? Is there any more that you want to share? We have possibly like 20, 25 more minutes left,
Yep. So I wanted to give a shout out to, well, thank you, Fatina and Hamda, for your, here we go. Thank you, Fatina and Hamda, for your contributions. And I also wanted to say that I know there's a lot of actions happening tomorrow. We're going to get to some of the questions that people have asked, but also there are a lot of actions happening tomorrow across the land. And I wanted to maybe give our panelists a chance to talk about some of those, what's happening in Saskatchewan tomorrow. I know that there's definitely people who are exhausted. We're exhausted of organizing all the time against a state that is relentless and has infinite resources compared to us. But still, like Kanahus said, we're still organizing. And one of the things that's happening up north tomorrow in Big River, Saskatchewan, Istahee is the fourth annual logging walk that Sylvia McAdam Sewiham runs on her family's ancestral hunting grounds, her traditional hunting grounds. And they have a walk every year and so it's a chance for Sylvia to show people her territory, her family's territory, to show them the devastation of logging in northern Saskatchewan and what colonialism does to the boreal, what it does to our homes, which is to destroy and clear cut logging all of these trees, these ancient forests. But not just forests, there's also graves. There's also people buried there and the remnants of home being destroyed by colonialism. So what she does is takes us on a walk around her territory, and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and it's a reminder of the things that we're fighting for and the fact that this isn't a game. There's so much more at stake here than giving up some fireworks or not singing the national anthem. This is about saving creatures and people and the lands that colonialism destroys, and it destroys our bodies. So being up at that logging walk and supporting an action that isn't happening in a city, it's happening away from cameras. There's not going to be fireworks. Is really a beautiful action, and I'm so thankful for Sylvia and her leadership in that, and for her family's leadership, because for me as an urban Indigenous person, when I get to see the action that's going on the land, out on the land and up north, that's a lot of the connection that I know is resistance. So I'm thankful for that, and I wonder if anyone else has anything to share on that note.
I think that it's really important that we always bring it back to the land, because the land is what has provided us with everything that we have, from our housing, our food, all of our basic needs that we need to survive. And my father always said 0.2%. That's what they forced everybody onto with those urban setting or like reservations is the 0.2, that the other 99.8 is what Canada is getting wealthy and rich off of. And that's why it's always important. Trudeau wants to bring it and say he's giving all these programs and services dollars, or make it look like he's doing something great. But if our land does not recognize the actual physical land, then that means nothing. And that's what we're fighting for, and that's why we're doing the things that we do, is always our land. So, like, I want to hear from what you all have to say. I know that there's the walk for the blockade that happened today in Winnipeg on the Trans-Canada Highway, one of the biggest arteries that goes through from the west to the east coast. We have, you know, the pipeline resistance that's happening across the whole country. That's something that's really connecting Indigenous people, is because our water is all connected and these pipelines are all connected. And that's the way that I want to reach out to other Indigenous people, and everybody out there that cares about our water and human rights, to reach out to all of us here, because this is the work that we're doing and it's very important. And like Erica said, we're tired of organizing. We're constantly doing that, and we need everybody to reach out. And this is the space for these women that have been helpful, very, very helpful in our movements and educating our people to I want to hear from all of you, you know, what you have what to say, because this is our first time connecting and it's powerful. And everything that you've said has touched my heart. And I know that we are sisters, are by blood, like our Indigenous blood. And I'm so glad that we have this time to conversate. Pam.
Yeah, so I was just going to add, because I mean, I feel the same way. The fact that we get to come together, even if not in person, we get to collaborate online and through social media. It's been like another tool that we get to use. And the fact that I get to meet, you know, Art Manuel's daughter, and I mean, you're a legend in your own right, and the resistance that you do, and the leadership that you show, and the risks that you take, and the same with Erica, and you know, all of the Idle No More women and supporters. And I mean, there's so many people that have been doing this work their entire lives, and I think the fact that we now have the tools and mechanisms to connect, even without money and even without travel, is what makes us so much stronger. And it'll continue to make us so much stronger, because we can in real time counter all of the propaganda and misinformation literally at the same time, if not before the government releases their ridiculous press releases. But I think in terms of sharing what's happening, I know tomorrow in Toronto, Indian Affairs Minister Carolyn Bennett is having a picnic, Happy Canada Day picnic downtown, and Idle No More organizers and lots of other community groups are all having a decolonize or occupy or unsettle this Canada Day picnic. So it's expected to draw a huge crowd. I know the weather might not be great, but I think it's really important, because Toronto is one of those, it's almost like we have a city of Indigenous peoples within a city. And there's like literally thousands of Indigenous people that get together at the Native Canadian Center or friendship centers, or during these kinds of events. And I think that helps build solidarity for lots of people, Indigenous people who are living in cities and who want to be a part of this resistance too. It's not just people living on reserve. It's not just people who are known activists or anything like that. The resistance is who we are as Indigenous people. We're only here because we have been born to resist assimilations. And so I think everything that's happening all over this country tomorrow is really, really important. And I think the more that we can get together in person and online with all of us, we help lift each other up and help, you know, refill our spirits and souls, because it is very tiring work and it never ends. It's not a 9 to 5. And I think all of you would agree, no matter what we do, whether we're students or moms or professors or construction workers or volunteers, we do this 24 hours a day in everything that we do. And I think it's important that, you know, we continue to uplift each other. So I'm honored to be a part of this.
Yeah, I think that everything that's been said has been right. And it's always amazing to me how I will never use the word resilience, because I hate the word resilience, because it makes it seem like enduring colonial crap is our purpose in life, which it's not. But the strength and the resistance of all of the women that I'm on the chat with right now is what keeps me going. And this TP action in Ottawa reminds me, in Algonquin territory, reminds me that what it takes for change is such a small little thing, like the smallest little things that you can imagine, to disrupt the colonial order make a big difference. So when we had the first so-called Idle No More gathering in inner city Saskatoon, it was just sort of something we threw together with no resources and no big media coverage. And it blew up and it turned into something beautiful. And the same with this TP action. I know these are just students who don't have resources. They don't have access to media. They don't have money. But they decided to go out and do something that's symbolic, at the same time practical, and ultimately rooted in love, whatever that love looks like, however it manifests. And there's anger there too, because those two are never separate. So I guess what keeps me going is the reminder that those little small things can do a lot to disrupt colonialism, and no one is powerless to make that change. You don't have to have a big platform. You don't have to have lots of money. So I look forward to seeing lots of amazing, beautiful little acts of disruption tomorrow and every day after that.
Thank you. Also, we can never forget the people that are out there on the territory that have left the 0.2 Indian Reserve System to claim back and reoccupy their territories. And people don't like that term, reoccupy, so I'm not going to say that, but go back to the land and start to live on our territories again off of the Indian Reserve. So I wanted to, there's the Unistoten camp. These are some of the places in BC. And I know there's places all straight across the so-called country of Canada, but there's the Unistoten camp, Mattie Lee, Lilu Island, Shutukath, you know, the Voice of the Voiceless camp, and Grassy Narrows. There's many places all across this country that have left that system, and they're really talking about decolonization and leaving these colonial ways as much as we can behind, and that includes building our traditional homes and harvesting our traditional foods. And this is some of the things that Native Youth Movement really inspired everybody to go. So one of the things that we're really trying to promote out here in so-called BC and within our territory is that our people don't have any homes. Like, we're homeless and no shelters to live in because of the reservation system, because of the colonial government, just the way that the system is. And so in our resistance against the pipeline, we will be building 10 tiny homes to put on the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline route. But this is also to promote, you know, so-called green energy. We're going to have solar. We're going to be able to have these tiny homes on wheels. We know that we're dealing with a lot of issues of criminalization and injunctions, and we want to be able to be mobile on our territory as well. And bringing that as a solution to the table for other people is that we really need to promote homes and contributing to each other in their nations and also building homes. And that's the proposal that I'm putting out there right now with all the Indigenous people. It's something that we are going to be pushing. And these are little tiny houses, but with the goal of living in all of our traditional homes throughout our territory. And solutions is something that people are really looking at. That we're saying, okay, we know all these issues, we know all these problems that we're facing, and how do we now get out of it? And this is what I want to ask, and we can leave that after this conversation about solutions. And I want to hear what your thoughts about is, how are we going to deal with this, such a magnitude of this issue that we're in right now? And I heard from Erica, and I totally agree with what she is saying when she says, like, just a small group of people can do big things, can change the world in a way that we wouldn't even imagine. And that's what I know in my heart, because we've seen that happen time and time again. But in the solutions of where we're going and with all these issues in our land, what are some little solutions that you think that we can be doing as Indigenous people, even in our own communities?
Sorry, my microphone was muted. Well, I mean, it's huge. Next steps are huge, and we're already in next steps. We've kind of chronically been in how do we go about decolonizing, and you know, we've been doing it. Every single court case we've won, every single piece of land that we've defended, every single one of our children that we've saved from foster care, every time we've spoken our language, every time we've acknowledged or helped our elders, every time we've babysat our sister's kids so that she could go to school or engage in a protest, all of these acts of resistance are also acts of decolonization. And that's, people don't realize what value they bring. They think, you know, you have to go to the United Nations and win lots of awards and win a giant case at the Supreme Court of Canada to make any change. But none of us would have been able to be on the front lines if there wasn't someone else behind us babysitting our kids or giving us food or giving us gas money to get to these places and go and do these things. And I think that's the lost story of how we've gotten to be where we are today. And if you think of any national protest that happened in the past, like the one against the 1969 white paper, we didn't have funding, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have social media, and certainly none of us were rich. So what do? We pile 20 Indians into a minivan with, you know, bannock and bologna sandwiches, and we travel across the country and engage in acts of resistance. And that's all it takes. You don't have to be an elected leader. You don't have to be famous. Now in this social media world, we can help empower each other in lots of different ways. And I think that's so important. Every time we say, I am Mi'kmaq, Kwenin Daluizi Mi'kmaq, this is an act of resistance, and it's changing the conversation. Look at what they, you know I already spoke about this, but look at what the people who brought the teepee did. They got the entire world's attention, the nation's attention, with no money, no organization, and we have the power to do that. And we need to support people like that. On the bigger side of things, in terms of the law and the politics, I think our strategies have to be diverse. We can't just be educators. We can't just be protesters. We can't just be court litigators. We actually have to do it all. And, you know, people like Cindy Blackstock call it mosquito advocacy, where you just never give up, and we get them from all sides, full blitz attack on all these different issues, because the federal government makes it look like they're very strong. They put on a very strong force, and they bring out the RCMP every time they're nervous about what we're doing, but they have a very thin front line. They have nothing behind them. All they have is that. So if we continue and we push, we win every time. And every time that we've been nationally organized, we've won. We managed to save our language and cultures despite residential schools because we practiced it subversively. You know, we managed to save all of our kids from not all of them going in foster care because we hid them. We broke the law. We were criminally Indigenous. And I think if we continue to be criminally Indigenous and protect ourselves, that's what decolonization is all about. So say, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I don't want your land acknowledgement. I want my land. So if we stop settling for the little beads and trinkets, and we stop letting our leaders settle for the beads and trinkets, then I think we will get a lot further. And that's going to be protesting, educating, changing the dialogue in the media, but it's also going to be helping our First Nations behind the scenes. It's going to be helping and supporting our activists. And it's also going to mean requiring our leaders to withdraw from anything that's not working for us. So if you're engaged in the land claim process, it's probably not good for us. So we need to educate our people to withdraw, because Canada only gets its legitimacy from us. If we withdraw from all of their processes and stop propping them up, they have no means to prop themselves up. And that's where all of our power is, in our yes or our no. And I think that's going to be the key moving forward, that we do it all. We respect all the different ways that people want to act and resist and decolonize, and we need to do it all. We need to engage them on every front, because I guarantee you they have a very thin front line and they cannot keep up with us.
Good job. Erica, did you want to respond to the solutions of where we go from here?
For me, something that's been really powerful is I'm thinking a lot lately about mental health and disability and the place of people in the movement when we're exhausted and when we're sick and when we're dealing with things in our own lives that are related to colonialism. So it's funny, like we're expected to be sort of the perfect Indigenous person all the time in order to have any legitimacy in a colonial system, and that person doesn't exist. So for those of us that are dealing with our own personal issues and feel exhausted by that and trying to like make a difference, I think supporting each other is so crucial. So checking in on each other. My closest friends and my closest friends who are organizers all know that checking in on each other and making sure that on a personal level we're doing okay can make a world of difference. So strengthening your connections, strengthening your community, looking out for one another, taking care of each other, because Canada is not taking care of us. So I think one of the most revolutionary things that we can do is take care of each other. And that doesn't mean putting up with abuse. It doesn't mean putting up with bad relationships and bad relationality, but it does mean recognizing the struggles that we're all facing and doing it together and realizing it's not a personal thing, right? Well, the things that we bring to our activism and our resistance are results of colonialism and patriarchy and all the systems imposed on us. So for me, I've been inspired by the work of collectives like Red Rising Magazine, who put out this gorgeous piece of literature every so often that is all Indigenous writers and people writing on Indigenous resistance. So collectives like that prop up and amplify the voices of people who aren't heard and who don't have the same platforms that a lot of us do, or the same platform as Justin Trudeau. So that's what keeps me going, is the voices of young Indigenous people moving forward. And you know what? The other great thing about youth is that they will push you forward. They'll push you forward to do things that seem scary and seem radical, but are actually what we need right now at this point in time, is someone to tell us to not be afraid to be called criminals, because we're being called criminals anyway, no matter what we do. So yeah, that's what keeps me going.
Thank you. So we're here at the end of this webinar. If there's anything else that any of the speakers would like to share, there's going to be actions as far as we know, Victoria, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Prince George, Regina. I know there was something planned also in Mi'kmaq territory on the East Coast, and Toronto, and of course Ottawa. These are all the white man's names, but I know that there's traditional place names for those areas, and I want to learn them and respect them. And that's something that we're all about, and recognizing Indigenous people and the work that they're doing in their territories. So if there's nothing else that any of the speakers want to share, we are going to sign out from this webinar, Unsettling Canada. We're not celebrating, but we're in Canada's birthday. We are celebrating in our resistance and all of the revolutionary Indigenous freedom fighters that came before us and those that will continue to fight. So Cook's Jam.